Good afternoon and welcome to the People's View for April 24th, 2019. I'm Bill Ohm. I'll be your host today. And with me is my good friend and former Alderman, Dave Schoeneman. Welcome back to the show, Dave.
Bill, thank you very much. Always glad to be here.
Our topic today is medical and legal marijuana. There's a bill before the legislature that had passed the House and is now in the Senate to tax, legalize, and raise money for general purposes the sale of marijuana in New Hampshire. This bill has a provision that it's legal upon passage, although cities and towns have the means to opt out. This is in contrast to what we've seen with the Keno bill, for example, where it was allowed for any city and town to opt in, but if they didn't opt in, it wasn't available. This is the opposite. It's available everywhere unless your city and town votes to opt out.
I see.
Now, some of the concerns that many of us have with the issue of medical marijuana is the impact on the folks.
Medical marijuana.
Legalized. Yeah, the regulation and distribution of marijuana in terms of both the financial impact of the state and also the personal impact on the families. And I think what I'd like to do is start out talking about what is the history of this project and what is the impact on the state's revenue. And then from there we can talk about the impact on city revenue and the impact on families.
Okay.
So the way it started was about 10 years ago when I was first in the legislature. Possession of any kind of marijuana was a criminal offense. It was a misdemeanor under state law. And then what happened was there was a lot of complaining that, well, that's on a person's record, the person was young, he was foolish, he or she was foolish. Why don't we just decriminalize it? We'll make this a violation of law, which is a civil penalty, and remove it from the criminal code. And after some hemming and hawing on a voice vote back in the 2011-2012 session, it was agreed that this would be a non-criminal offense, civil violation, still illegal, but not a criminal offense. Then as we were moving on over the past few sessions, there was a lot of talk about the issue of medical marijuana. Well, if we're going to make it a violation, and there are people who have been traumatized in various cases, and most seriously would be the veterans who were serving perhaps in Vietnam and other places, who have PTSD and have found out that the marijuana helps settle them down a bit and leads them to a more stable life. So that came before the legislature, and then that was passed as legalizing medical marijuana under prescription. And then there was some talk about, well, how do we handle this? You know, do we have dispensaries? Do we let the folks who are qualified grow their own? And it was decided to do dispensaries. So now we have legalized for medical purposes marijuana in dispensaries. And now the next step, now the last shoe is starting to fall, which is, well, since we have it as non-criminal and we have it as dispensaries and we're selling it through these itemized buildings, why don't we just open it up? Pot for all. So the bill before the legislature is House Bill 481, which legalizes marijuana in New Hampshire. It passed the House, it's into the Senate. And as we speak to this bill, I would encourage our readers, our viewers, to think about whether this is an important topic for you and whether you might want to call your senator and the governor to express your opinions on legalizing for any adult over the age of 21 marijuana. So let's talk about a bit about some of the numbers, Dave, and then we can talk about some of the social aspects.
Okay.
In the bill, there's a provision that it's going to raise money for the addiction issues that are associated with any kind of opioid, and marijuana is an opioid. So there's some money, about $5 million, put aside for people who become addicted. However, The bill expects to raise about $30 million and intends to be a new revenue stream to the general fund of New Hampshire from sale of this product, which is illegal under federal law. Now, because it's illegal under federal law, there's complications in handling the transactions. Banks will not take credit cards. You can't use the banking system for a controlled substance like marijuana, so it's a cash transaction. And it's going to be a little dicey when you come to the fact that the taxation of this is going to be a bit less than Massachusetts. So there'll be incentive for anyone who might be entrepreneurial oriented to buy your marijuana in New Hampshire and take it across state lines, which is illegal, and sell it to a market that's going to have a higher price due to higher taxes. So that's just one of the, I think, the social costs with this bill. Then there's the other costs, which brings to the family issues of, is this something you want young adults to have? Right. And I'd ask you what your thoughts about that, Dave.
Well, it's interesting. The tax rate on retail sales is going to be 9%. That's a sales tax of 9%. When we talk about sales taxes, and you hear states might have a 5% sales tax, a 5% sales tax sounds high. So here we're jumping right to 9%. And we don't have a sales tax other than what's proposed here in New Hampshire. So this is sort of like the other bills that we've considered here on this show. The Family Leave Act, it seems to be an entree for more than marijuana. It's an entree for a sales tax in New Hampshire. And one of the distinctives that we have in New Hampshire is that we don't have a sales tax. We don't have an income tax. And I think to go down the road of sales tax for anything is wrong. I don't think that we should do that. There are a lot of other things that would argue against this marijuana bill than just the fact that it institutes a sales tax in New Hampshire. But I think that is one of them. Now, what's the sales tax in Massachusetts? Do we know what that number is?
Yeah, it's between 5% and 6%. They've exempted the liquor business from sales because of our competition from New Hampshire, and they'd like to increase the Massachusetts tobacco tax because our tobacco tax is about $1 less a pack.
I see.
And
what is the marijuana tax in Massachusetts?
It's about 20%.
So about 20%. So it's roughly double what our proposed tax here is. Right. So that's where the incentive comes to come to New Hampshire, maybe to Nashua, buy your marijuana, and then take it across the border and sell it to your...
And arbitrage it into the other markets.
Buy low and sell high, right? Just drive across the border.
Right.
Easily done. I have a question too about the vote that was taken in the House. Do you know what the numbers were? Was it straight party line, and is it a veto-proof majority? Do you know?
Yeah, I took a look at the vote. That's an excellent question, Dave. Many of these issues, especially issues that raise a new sales tax or any kind of a tax, typically are party line issues. This was not a party line issue. The majority of the people in favor were the Democrat. But there are a number of Republicans also in favor of the bill. And looking at the mix of the Republicans, they tend to be more of the libertarian crowd, where they believe that people should be allowed to do whatever they want, and if it's going to be a narcotic, well, it's the way it is. That part surprised me though, because usually our libertarian friends are very much opposed to any new tax increases that would go to the general fund. So they must have had a difficult decision in balancing this.
Yeah, I can understand the freedom aspects to it. I very much like to be left alone. I don't call myself a libertarian. I'm a Republican, but I like to be left alone. I think Republicans generally view life in the world as we can be self-responsible, we can take care of ourselves, leave us alone, and we will thrive. And I think that's how the United States has done as well as it has. Over these 200 some odd years, we have a system that leaves people alone and they thrive. But there are things that come along that do have a social cost. I think it's interesting that the proponents of the bill understand that this is an opioid, and they understand that there's an addictive aspect to marijuana. They're funding addiction treatments as part of this because they believe that they are creating a problem. To bring in marijuana, they believe that this vote is going to create a problem, and they're just trying to fund the solution to the problem they know they're creating. I've said before on this show, and I've said it as an alderman, I think that we as human beings should never expect a net good to come from doing something that we know is wrong. And I think that the proponents of this bill, I think what they really want is the revenue. And what Representative Abrami said in the article I read there is that he's fearing that the legislature is going to become addicted to the funds. And perhaps that's why they're willing to sell an addictive substance in order, because, you know, everyone wants to be addicted here. I think that we're trying to addict people so that legislators can get these funds to spend.
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear that many legislators are addicted to revenue increases.
Yeah. And once this starts, you know, it's not gonna go away. And I think that if it ever were to go away, it would only go away after the social cost really turned out to be astronomical. I mean, there are social costs to these kinds of things. Like I say, I'm about freedom. I think let people decide. It's interesting to note too that when we talk about the criminal aspect in years past, they say, well, someone was young and foolish. So here we're trying to encourage people that might be young and foolish to do something that could actually harm them.
By the old and foolish.
Yeah. Right, exactly. And I just think we need to be very careful on these things.
To get back to your other question about the vote, the vote was roughly 200 in favor and about 160 against. And that's not a veto-proof majority. So if the governor decides that it passes the Senate, which it probably will, and goes to his desk, then he'll have a situation where he'll be the deciding factor on that.
Yeah, I think that I saw the paper today, Union Leader. It was an article in the paper about some of the testimony that was given against this bill, and I believe there was someone came in from another state where they talked about some of the problems that occurred elsewhere, and there was a young woman too, a high school student who sat there and testified against the bill. I think that there is damage that's going to occur, and the other states might have more experience, haven't gone down this road before we have, and I think we should listen to those opinions. I hope that Governor Sununu would listen to those opinions as well, because he's definitely against increasing taxes, and this is an increase in tax. Not only is it an increase in tax, but it's bringing a new type of tax into the state. I think that's a mistake, and I think that the testimony against was really from some very powerful advocates against this legislation from a social impact standpoint. Really, I think that the social impact argument against this legislation outweighs the argument that says we just want more money on the proponent side. I'm wondering where some of the funding for the proponents is coming from. It sounds like there's some out-of-state money advocating for this push, and it seems that all these things are just taking us down a path that are going to lead to a net harm, and I would be very much against this.
Yeah. I want to talk about the workforce issues relative to this topic. You know, when somebody comes into the office drunk or inebriated or hungover, you know, that's not good for the workforce.
Right.
If you have somebody who's smoking marijuana, and at these levels of potency, it looks like it might have a fairly long, what I'll call a half-life before it gets out of your system. It's not really clear what's going on if there's no alcohol in the breath. There's, you know, maybe some lethargy, some other symptoms. But there's no real good test for impairment on this. So if you're an employer and somebody comes in, is this person, you know, having a problem? Or is this really a systemic issue that's now caused by an addiction to the opioid that is not easily tested? And further, if you are driving to work, if you are impaired through alcohol, and it's obvious that when the officer stops you that you've got alcohol in your breath, they'll give you an breathalyzer test or have you take a blood test. But there's really no good test for opioid impairment. You can't just, you know, check the guy on the spot other than ask him, but you can't really qualify the source of his impairment. So what do? You let him go. And I'm not sure also whether it affects, driving the same way that alcohol might affect driving.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so I think it's a risky way to raise money
Mm-hmm.
because, as we've talked about at the beginning, that's what this bill's about.
Yeah.
It's $5 million for a treatment, but it's also $25 million for spending money,
Right. Spending money, pocket money, and
pocket money.
I think that's clearly not right. Now, one of the things that seems to be the case with the marijuana too is that there's other ways to take it besides smoking it. There were some forms I read in there that where the concentration of this opioid is actually quite a bit higher. And is this then how is this consumed?
Well, in other states, they have these extracts. So if you want to bake cookies that have a little buzz to them,
Mm.
you put some of this extract in the cookies, and it's highly concentrated. The levels I've been reading now are the purification methods get it up into the high 90s of pure THC,
Hmm.
whereas smoking it might be in the teens, low teens concentrate. But now you've got in these extracts, these oils, are very high dose.
Hmm.
So in places like Nevada, they restrict the goods you can make from these concentrates. They can't make like bunny bears and cookies. They have to be something that's more adult oriented.
Hmm.
But it's still a risk.
Definitely it's a risk. And if those levels are that high,
Yeah,
I think the addictive properties would be
yeah.
enlarged as well.
I actually went to Nevada a year ago. I was at a trade association group that took a tour of the medical, I'm sorry, not the medical, the marijuana, the legal marijuana situation in Nevada. And we saw the growing operations, we saw the quality control operations, we saw the retail operations. And we also got a feeling for the financial operations.
Mm-hmm.
In Nevada, as in Colorado, they're looking at making several $100 million a year of new revenue from recreational marijuana.
Wow, that's a lot. So they're already addicted to that money.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And I heard reports, I haven't been to Denver, but I've heard reports that since Colorado legalized marijuana, that you've got street problems that you didn't have before
Hmm.
in Denver.
Hmm.
You've got people who are not particularly motivated. People might be homeless and now have a additional addiction, not just the alcohol, but now a
Hmm.
marijuana addiction because
Hmm.
it's legal
Hmm.
and it's available.
Yeah, that brings me back to that. We should never expect a net good.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
they've done this and they have the revenue, but the societal costs are rising
yeah.
because there are things there that are occurring that weren't anticipated.
Let's
And I think the
fast
same
forward.
would be true here.
Let's fast forward now through this. So we may have a societal cost, and over a year or two, it might become apparent that we have a serious societal cost, particularly in the cities of Manchester and Nashville, where you and I live, where you got the large population centers.
Hmm.
Uh, so you say, well, maybe we made a mistake back in 2019 about legalizing this product,
Hmm.
and let's kind of back off. Okay, so now we're getting $30 million of revenue that are going to the general fund and other dedicated funds that we're now going to have to go cold turkey on.
Right.
So how are you going to make up that $30 million of lost
Right,
revenue?
because we know it's not going to go in a rainy day fund.
No,
It's
no,
going to be spent.
it's going to be spent.
And that's the whole idea is to raise money so they can spend more
Yeah.
money. And I think they want to get all of us addicted on having that revenue so that if it ever does go away, well, we just need sales tax and income tax.
So right now, we'll have to substitute that with, well, the sales tax we're now collecting on marijuana. We can't collect sales tax on marijuana. Well, we just collect sales tax on everything else that's going through the retail distribution.
Right,
And only a small sales tax, maybe just 1%
right.
for now,
For now,
until we need more money.
yeah.
Yep.
And that's what it's all about.
Yeah.
So I'm certainly not in favor of that. What is the implication to the towns? You talked a little bit about the towns. The towns would have to opt out, unlike the Keno where they had to opt in. How would a town opt out?
Yeah, I haven't seen the exact mechanism in the report for that. I imagine it'd be like with the Keno bill, they'd have to have a referendum, and the
Hmm.
voters would have to say we opt out.
Hmm.
Also, in the revenue side to the cities and towns, things like the food and beverage room and meals tax are distributed by population in all the towns.
Okay.
Kind of it's spread out everybody.
So not by how many hotels there
No,
are,
not by how many
not
hotels.
by how many hotel receipts,
Right.
but really just by the population.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you're not trying to encourage the towns who are not building big hotels to build big hotels because everybody's going to benefit from the places that have hotels or large restaurants. But in this bill, there's a skew. You can have a little bonus if you're
If you're willing to promote it locally. So if the city hall, the board of aldermen, the mayor were to get behind this and really want to promote it, they themselves would start getting some more money to spend on things they want to spend on too. So I think it's furthering the addiction. It's not only trying to get the legislators in Concord addicted to the extra revenue, it's trying to feed it to the kids at City Hall who want it too,
Yeah.
want the extra revenue as well. Again, no good. So what would a city like Nashua or a city like so what do the cities in New Hampshire do? I think they'd be incentivized to get a marijuana stand on every corner.
Yeah. And again, I think it's very insidious that it's allowed unless voted against.
Yeah.
I mean, I think a much better approach would be it's prohibited unless it's opted in by the voters of the town.
By the voters in the town, not the Board of Aldermen.
And not the legislature in New Hampshire.
Yes.
We, the legislature, are saying, those of us in the legislature are saying, well, we want it because we want the money.
Right.
And you got to tell us through your town meeting process or your alderman process that you're going to opt out. But if you don't stand there and say this is bad, it's coming.
Mm-hmm. And by the way, you're going to get some of the revenue, so we're going to share it with you.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's very insidious.
Yeah.
If this bill were to pass, I think it would have to be an opt-in, where the state's going to step aside and say, well, if you want to do this, well, you're on your own, and good luck. But we're not going to put this on your plate and then say, oh,
Yeah.
candy here, take it.
Well, I think that if they were to take the approach that you had to opt in, it would be as if they were saying, we know this isn't so good. If you really want to do it, you can do it.
Yeah.
But what they're saying is, we really want this money.
And if the parents say, look, I could deal with, having cigarettes and booze, but, we're going to draw the line somewhere here.
Right.
And no opioids.
Especially when we're facing such an opioid crisis.
Yeah.
I mean, how can legislators be complaining about our opioid problem and then saying, by the way, we're going to start selling some opioids?
Yeah, and we hope we sell a lot of opioids because we'll then get a lot of money for addiction prevention.
Right. So why not sell heroin too?
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, I think I go back in history to the Chinese back in the 1800s, where the Chinese were a very self-reliant society. I mean, they were really self-reliant. They didn't want to have any Western influence. We had our culture for hundreds of years. We've been opened up to the West. So the British ships would come in and they would love our silks and they would give us gold and say, okay, we fine. We appreciate your gold because we like gold also, and you like our silks, and we'd be happy to sell it to you, and that's okay. But don't mess with our culture, Well, the British wanted to sell more than just gold to the Chinese. They wanted to sell mechanical parts. They wanted to sell clocks initially and other items. And the Chinese were saying, well, we're pretty self-reliant. We don't want the rest of your culture. We'll take your gold and we'll take our silks and we're good. So back in the 1800s, the British decided they had an import that they thought would be useful to the British, which the Chinese might have some fun with, and that was opium. So they brought opium to the Far East. Not to London, to the Far East, to China.
I see.
And they got the population addicted on opium.
Yeah, it was a big, big problem.
And that was a big source of getting their gold back to Britain because, and then you had horrible issues with families and production and quality of life. And finally, it took the revolution under Mao to basically shut down all the opium dens and get rid of the drug from China. It's a very, very tough process. Now,
Yes.
we're not likely to go on that extreme a path, but I think there's some lessons to be learned from the issues of once you start these kind of addictive drugs, these kind of narcotics
Right.
in the general population.
Yeah, it's a problem.
Yeah.
It's a problem that is not going to just kind of go away on its own, and there is a big price to pay. I don't see us going to war over it, like you had indicated, but we should be able to learn from history. And bringing opium into China at that time was caused a huge problem, and it took many years. And China, I think, China is now under a system that was the result of what Mao did
Yeah.
to get rid of opium, and so the reach of those tentacles over time was really profound. And I think that the reach of marijuana over time in New Hampshire is going to be profound too. So I'm hoping that Governor Sununu will veto that because if the numbers aren't veto-proof from the House, then Sununu could make that decision. And I don't think personally, if I was in his shoes, and I'm not in his shoes, but I think he's a man that I respect, and I think that he wants to do things that he can be proud of. To be the governor that signs this into law, I think would not be something that he would be proud. Certainly not something I'd be proud of. Even if there was a veto-proof majority, even if even if there was,
You have to make a statement on
you have
this.
to make a statement, and I would hope that on the basis of it being bad for New Hampshire, for the users, as well as bad for New Hampshire and the institution of a sales tax, I think that he doesn't want that to be part of his legacy. No one would.
No. And I think I'll ask our viewers if they'd like to make a statement, talk to your senators, talk to the governor, let them know how you feel about the topic of legalized marijuana. For Dave, myself, thanks for watching.
Thanks.
That's a wrap.
Very
Good.
good, Dave.